Woohoo! So that's always cool. So I am going to turn it over to my wife and to Caleb.
All right. Just like you're walking across the top.
And then turn around and look at us so we can take a picture.
I want you to put your feet down there and sit on that ledge. There you go. And then you got to turn and look to your whole family. How's that? Is it warm? Not bad? Not bad? Okay, turn around and look at me.
Let's see up.
There we go. This is Caleb. Caleb Walker. He is 8 years old, and he has been asking for 2 years, a year, 2 years, to be baptized. He has been wanting for a long time. We keep saying, well, let's wait a little longer. Let's make sure you understand what you're doing. And he went through one of our baptism books and wrote out all the chapters and turned it in. And then he and I sat down and talked with each other for a while on Sunday and made sure that he understood what he was doing. And are you excited? Yeah. And he's been inviting people to come. He wanted to make sure the people he cared about most came and saw as well. So Caleb, why don't you look at me, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you got to answer really loud, okay?
And say yes.
And say yes. That's good. Do you believe that Jesus is God's one and only Son? Say it really loud.
Yeah.
And are you ready to give your whole life to Him, let Him wash away all your sins, and live your life for Jesus?
Yes.
Oh, say it really loud.
Yes.
All right. Because of your profession of faith, I'm going to baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Okay, ready? Take a big breath. There we go. Woo! There we go.
And he's so,
Wrap you up.
he's so.
I want the wet hug. Give me the wet hug.
That's awesome.
There you go. All right, little kiddos. Off to the back room.
Just 25 every year. Students.
That's what my sister says. And she's about 4 years in. I say, okay.
All right. Well, we're going to go on with Bible study now. The kids have left, and so we're going to go on. We're going to be talking about Joseph's dreams tonight. And so we're done with the main part of the patriarchs. Now we're going to move into the story of Joseph. And again, we're just going to kind of look at this, kind of go through some of the things, talk about some of the better points. But remembering that Joseph is the 11th son of Jacob. So down the row a ways. He's not next in line for the big inheritance necessarily, but yet he is still Jacob's favorite son. And so that's what we're going to be reading about tonight and looking at is the kind of the conflict that has created over time with this. So we're going to be in Genesis 37. Genesis 37, starting in verse 1, it says, Jacob lived in the land where his fathers had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father had loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So what we have here is, number one, we're going to look at a couple of things that are just interesting. Okay, Joseph, when he's a young man, just 17, he goes out to help tend the flocks with his brothers. And everybody knows he's dad's favorite. So his brothers are out there, and they're apparently not doing everything they should do exactly right. They're screwing around a little bit or something, didn't get, the sheep to the watering hole that they needed to, whatever. So Joseph comes back and tells on them all. Boy, they weren't doing their job correctly, which, when they already don't really like him, that just makes them love him that much more. Not only is he dad's favorite, but he's a tattletale. And so, ooh, great. And so it says that Jacob made him a richly ornamented robe here, it says. Now, most of us have grown up hearing about his coat of many colors. Joseph's coat of many colors. And that's the way a lot of times it's been translated and a lot of times it's been used. The truth is, the Hebrew word that's used here, nobody knows exactly what it means. And so, so it could be many colors. It could be just that it was ornate in some way. Possibly, like I said, the colors or something like that. Some people have even chosen to translate it a coat with sleeves, because even that would have been something that was seen as more of a status rather than just a cloak that you would throw over yourselves. But tradition has that it's the coat of many colors, and so when you see richly ornamented in your brain, you can say, oh, many colors. Because that's what we've held on to for traditions. They've wrote musicals about it. They've done movies about it. They've done all that kind of stuff. So we'll let the color, coat of many colors stand. We're not going to refute it because, like I said, the true meaning of what they intended with that Hebrew word has been lost to history. They just know that it was a coat that Jacob gave to Joseph to set him apart from the rest of his brothers, proving this is my favorite. Which again, that always goes so well in a family. It's not bad enough that he's got 2 wives and he's choosing between them, and then he's got 2 other handmaidens that were given to him as wives, and he's got children from them, and so it's not like they have a perfect family dynamic anyway. And then to take the 11th in line and say, this is the one that I love. The rest of you are okay, but this is the one. This is the boy right here. So in 5 and 6 then it says, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream that I had. Now again, not the favorite of the brothers, just the favorite of dad. So Joseph says, guys, you're not going to believe the dream I had. This is a great one. You'll love this. This is my dream. So in 7 and 8 it says, we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Yeah, that makes them all love him. Oh, by the way, not only does dad love me more, I got this great coat, but I'm better than y'all too. So just keep that in mind. And then it says, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. That's the third. They hated him all the more. And we've only got into this 8 verses. Okay? So you can see the love building, that brotherly love. Man, this guy's so great. And so everything he does is setting his brothers against him and on edge. And then in 9 and 10, it said, then he had another dream. And he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had, that your mother and I, your brothers, actually come and bow down to the ground before you? And so now Dad's even going, okay, I think you're a little big for your britches. He said, your brothers have been complaining about you, but you're still my favorite. But whoa, dude, you're crossing a line here. Now you're saying that your mother and I are going to bow before you. I think it's time we have a little reality check. You are the 11th, and so settle down a little bit. But Joseph is having these dreams, and he's expressing this, and his brothers are hating him all the more. But of course, we know the end of the story. We know that what he is dreaming is from God. And so when we get into this next part, I want you to understand, and I've been kind of emphasizing it and making fun of it, but I want you to understand the emotion behind what is happening here. This is not just simply we're kind of tired of our brother. Oh, we had a little spat. These guys are just fed up with him. And they're ready to be done. I can't live with this guy anymore. And he has just pushed that line. And then with these dreams, he's saying, and now you guys are going to bow down to me. And his brothers are just going, this is ridiculous. We're not going to stand for this. So in 11 through 13, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So, keeping in the theme of everything else that's made his brothers mad, now they're out grazing the flocks. Joseph stayed back because he's special anyway. So he didn't have to go on the long trip to take them up to greener pastures. But now he's going to go basically as a supervisor just to make sure they're doing it okay. Remember how we started the whole story? Joseph came back with a bad report. So he's not afraid to tell, Dad on the brothers on Dad. Say, hey, you know what? Dad, these guys aren't doing their job. So here he is now in kind of a supervisory role sent out by his dad to go check up on them and see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So he can come back and sit in the tent and, again, drink iced tea or something while his brothers are out watching the flocks up in the higher country and probably sweltering out there and having a lovely time sleeping on the ground while he's back staying in the house. So in 14 through 17, it says, so he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. And so Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. So he's kind of, again, when they would take the sheep out to graze, if you're familiar at all with how green this area in particular in Israel is, to find grass at all, you sometimes had to travel a long way. So they are miles from home, days travel from home. And so he gets up to Shechem, they're not there. The people there said, no, they've moved on to Dothan, go and check there. And he finally finds them there. But he is a long journey from where he began. So he's traveling out trying to find his brothers and see if they've got good pasture land for them, see if they've found good water and stuff. And in 18 through 20, it says, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. So when I was saying they'd had enough to the point where they were seriously saying, you know what? Nobody can see us out here. We're days away from Dad. And nobody around here even knows us if they do see us. This is our chance to get rid of this guy. And we'll just be rid of him and move on with our lives. And so it says, here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So their intent is get rid of him. Now, cisterns over in Israel, much like here, they're big pits that have been dug, usually lined with stone and stuff so that they can hold water. They're not wells. Wells are where you dig down to find water. Cisterns are just big holding tanks in the ground, basically. So they're just these big pits that are cut. They line them with rocks and stuff like that. And then in the rainy season, they divert water into them. And then they have water. It serves kind of like a well, with the exception of cisterns. Right after the rainy season, when everything settles, you have really good, clean water off the top. And people are, fresh, clean water there. It's come from the rains. It's sitting there. As the season progresses, the water gets thicker as you go down, until finally it's about as much mud as it is water, because again, this is not a water source, this is a water storage tank. And when you get down so far, all the sediment has been down there. And so that's what they're dealing with. Now what we're going to find out here in a second is the one that they choose eventually to throw him down into was dry. So what that tells us is the season they're in here. The clues that we have, and it's fun to look at Scripture and look at the geographical clues. We can see the places they went, but by knowing where they started and where they went to, we can kind of predict the season that they're in, because they're moving up towards the north, which is usually cooler and wetter, and they're moving that way and they're hitting dry cisterns, which means this is at the end of the dry season. This is not rainy season. This is not. So that's why they have to keep moving the flocks north and moving further and further away, is because they're seeking that next little bit of grass that still has enough moisture to grow. And I have been over there and during January, and that's kind of the wet season, December to January. And you look at this brown hill and it just has like this green 5 o'clock shadow on it. It looks like it just needs a little bit of a shave. And then you see people moving their flocks to that hill. And you're like, oh, that's the grassland. Being from the Midwest, that's not grassland to us, but to them it is. Oh, look, you can see a little green shading up there. That means there's something for the sheep to eat. And so that's what they're doing. They're chasing moisture. They're chasing a little bit of coolness. They're chasing the grass. And that's why they have to keep moving the flocks and keep moving around like that. So they plot to kill him. We're going to kill him. We got a cistern here. We'll dump him in the bottom of this. Nobody will even find him. It's done. So then in 21 through 24, it says, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it, which again is an indicator of the season they're in. No rains. There's no moisture out there. So they dump him into the cistern, and some of these cisterns are really deep. Tell you another little story here. When I was going to school over there, a person in the group ahead of us, they went to one of the sites, and they give you this warning when you're over there going to some of the archaeological sites. They tell you that there is no such thing as OSHA in Israel, and so they don't have to put clearly marked signs, guardrails, that kind of stuff up. It's an open site. It's a working archaeological site. So they tell you, be very cautious, stay on the path. The path is safe. That's the only thing they guarantee. And anyway, the group got together to take a picture, and this guy said, I'll take the picture. So he takes his camera, and he gets ready to take it, and he can't get the whole group in. So he takes a step back, can't get the whole group in, takes another step back, and at this point he leaves the path. And so he walks back about 3-4 more steps into the brush, and he disappeared. Boom, gone. They're all looking, and they hear him start screaming, and they ran over there, and thankfully he was taking a picture because he was holding onto a camera and his elbows were out, and his arms caught him from dropping 40 feet into an empty cistern with pot shards in the bottom. And so he's hanging there by his elbows, dangling over this pit, screaming bloody murder, basically saying, come get me. And they came and they pulled him out of there. But that's why you don't leave the path unless you know where you're walking in Israel. But yeah, so these are very deep holes. They're not like, you think, it's something they dug and they lined, so maybe it's only 10 feet deep or something like that. These are intentionally dug very deep so they can hold as much water as possible. And so, I don't know exactly how deep this one was or the dimensions of it and stuff, but it was dry, it was deep enough that he's not just climbing out of it. And so they put him down in there and they think, we're rid of him. We didn't kill him. His blood is not on us. We're not guilty of an infraction of the law that way. So we haven't killed him. We'll just leave him here. We didn't kill him. He had the option of living. We're just not going to give him anything to do it with. And so in 25 through 27 it says, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and do not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. Why should we kill our brother when we can sell him into slavery and make some cash? We're still rid of him. He still ain't coming back. And our problems are solved. And we made a little money on the side. There you go. And we don't have his blood on our hands. We don't have that guilt on our head. So that's their plan now. Is, oh look, here's some Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites, obviously descendants of Ishmael. So we're talking kind of kin here again. And they're on their way down, and they're heading for Egypt, loaded down with stuff. Well, spice traders, balm traders, myrrh traders, whatever you want to say, these guys are a caravan of trading things. One of the things that was popular is slaves. People that they had either captured or been sold into slavery because of debts and things that they owed. And so they were trading with that as well. And if you think this is really crazy, think about the time. But Abraham, how do you think that he collected a lot of his wealth after he left his father's house? Well, most likely he was a merchant. And he obviously did enough trading and stuff because he had 318 fighting men in his household. Remember? And that's before he had kids. So these are not descendants. These are people that he had acquired through trades, through whatever. Now, here's the other thing you have to keep in mind. Slavery was not the same thing at this time that it was in the 1800s in the United States. We're talking about two completely different things. But neither one's right. Okay? But that's what a lot of this was, is people who owed debts, people who were indebted to other people in that respect, or people who were conquered or whatever would be given into trade to equal their worth. That's what they decided to do with Joseph. We can get rid of this guy and make a little cash. Let's send him on his way. And so they decide to sell him. And then in 28 through 30 it says, so when the Midianite merchants, Midian being part of the Ishmaelites, so it's the same people, it's just more specific. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? So Reuben is the whole time, like it said before, thinking, let's just throw him in the cistern. I'll come back tonight. Help him get out. Send him on his way. So Reuben had compassion on Joseph, even though he really didn't like him that much more than any of the other brothers. He had compassion, and I think he also had compassion for his father, knowing that Joseph was his favorite. And the thought of breaking his dad's heart was probably a little more than he wanted to deal with as well. So he planned on going back. He goes back. He's gone. And then in 31 through 33 it says, then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So they play this up fully. It's not enough that Joseph disappears, because Dad's going to send us out looking for him if nothing else. So we've got to go through this whole thing. We're not going to kill him. We're going to sell him into slavery, but we've got to go back and tell Dad, don't even bother looking for him. He's dead. And that will just end that chapter. So they take his robe that would be recognizable by Jacob, and they take it and they dip it in goat's blood, tear it up a little bit, take it back and go, wow, we just happened to find this as we were traveling around. Look, it's covered in blood. Now there is no DNA testing. There's no, CSI that's going to come rolling up to the tent out there and do tests on this thing. So all they do is they got this robe that's been torn up and it's covered with blood, and they said, must be Joseph's. Look, he's been killed. And so they get rid of him, make a little money, close the books with Dad, everything's done. And then in 34 through 36 it says, then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning I will go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So that's the first part of the story of Joseph, okay? So, again, I don't think I'm spoiling it for anybody. We know the outcome of this whole thing. But the phrase that we're going to see Joseph use later is really pertinent through this whole study. And that is that what man intended for evil, God intended for good. And so God still has his hand on this. He gave Joseph the dreams. His brothers hated him for it, but it was actually prophecy that he was getting. This is what's going to happen. And so it seems like if you just read that and have no clue about the rest of the story, it seems like this one who was favored by Jacob and even favored by God has now been out of the picture. It's over because of the decisions of man. Man, taking him out of here. It's done. But God's plan is moving exactly the way it needs to. And so Joseph, as we're going to see, remains faithful to God through this whole ordeal. But that puts him in a position to not just save his family, but to save nations. And so God is using this for good. Now, what does that have to do with us? Well, because what we're going to see over the next couple of studies is Joseph has a choice. We talk about choices a lot here. Joseph has a choice. He can sit in the corner and bellyache and whine and say, woe is me, I'm done. Or he can continue to trust in God and see where God is going to move next. And that's what he chooses to do. In our day-to-day life, a lot of times we have the situations where we have the choice where we can either accept what is happening to us and still have a heart focused on God and looking to him and saying, okay, God, what's the next step? This doesn't make sense to me. I don't like what I'm going through. I don't like the pain. I don't like the hurt. I don't like the sorrow, whatever it is. But what's the next step? And it's up to us to choose to have that faith remaining in God. If we choose to sit in the corner and just suck up and go, it doesn't worth it anyway, then that's our choice. But if we say, okay, God, I don't understand why I'm going through this and I don't like it, but I'm going to continue to trust in you and follow you and keep taking a step forward, then God will continue to lead and his plan will continue to work forward. But we have to make that choice. Because I'm going to tell you, speaking by putting my own thoughts into Joseph's head, there were days, I'm sure, when he's sitting there in Egypt going, this is not what I would have chose. I could think of a different thing that I'd rather be doing today than being a slave in Egypt. I'm just guessing. I'm going out on a limb. But yet, he continues to be faithful over long periods of time. The story that we're going to be reading is only going to be for a few weeks, but you have to understand that we're talking over decades. This is taking place. This is not 1 or 2 years from start to finish. This is several years as we go through this. So we're going to see Joseph and his move forward with this. But again, it's because he has chosen to remain faithful to God even in the hard times. And so God is going to continue to bless him even in those hard times. And so again, that's kind of a choice we have, is are we going to look for the blessings in what is happening, even if it's hard to see? Or are we going to just focus on ourselves and throw a little pity party and say, woe is me, and shut down? Because that's easy to do. To look at our immediate surrounding and say, I don't like this. And then just kind of suck back into ourselves. Or we can wait to see, what can God do through this if I remain faithful and continue to follow him? So, questions, comments?
I was struck when it said that Jacob's sons and daughters came.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know about Dinah.
We know about one daughter, but there were others.
There could have been, or it could have been daughters-in-law and or grandkids too. So
Yep. But could have been other daughters too. We don't know, because again, we got the record of the 12 sons, and we know there's a daughter stuck in there. But then that kind of closes the chapter on that genealogy. So I think Dinah's mentioned more because of the story we get later, and because she's in the middle of all the sons, not later. So, but yeah, it could have been daughters-in-law, could have been, children, whatever. We're a lot, in that sense, we're a lot more specific in the words we use with daughters and stuff, as opposed to daughter-in-law or granddaughter or whatever. It's just kind of daughter. Any other comments? Yes?
Have you seen Patterns of Evidence on, I think it was on Prime?
I have.
Because in there, they're talking about, when you're talking about the Roman colors, there's a statue that they
Yep.
found. They don't know who it's of, but they can tell it's not in Egypt.
Right.
But it's found in Egypt, and it's got multiple colors on its robe.
Colors on the robe, yeah. And it could be, like I said, that comes out of research that other people have done, that, yeah, they think that maybe that's what it was. But as far as the Hebrew word, it's indescript. So that's why Bibles a lot of times will choose ornamented, richly ornamented robes, something like that, which could mean colors, sleeves, jewels, whatever. Star Trek emblem, I don't know.
Tassels and an eagle on the back.
The what?
Tassels and an eagle on the back.
Yeah, eagle on the back, yeah. Harley Davidson up on the side, yeah, that kind of thing. Any of that could have been what they, what it was that made it special, but we don't know for sure. But traditionally, it is the coat of many colors. That's the story that comes out of. And so some of the translations are going to say a multicolored coat or a whatever. But I even heard that one. Do we start that one? I think Robbie actually is wearing a version of the richly ornamented robe. The hoodie there with the big OU on it. That's actually what probably it was more like. No, I figured that's what it was when you turned and talked to Mike. I'm like, oh, they're talking about Oklahoma right now.
Is it common for them to switch names in the same chapter? Because at the beginning of 37 it says Israel, Joseph, and then towards the end of it says Jacob.
It can be. Again, some of that's through translation and transliteration, but because he's the same guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, they'll switch back and forth sometimes with that.
It's just weird to see that in the same
Yeah.
chapter.
Yeah. And a lot of times I think it's whether they're trying to put the focus on him being the father of the nations to come, the 12 tribes, as opposed to dad over these 12 sons, And I think by using Jacob at the end, it's more personal, that he's talking about his son rather than Israel, the father of many, many people. So. Anything else?
I guess I was just thinking about when Joseph had all this happening to him, he might not have understood all that was going on in his relying upon whatever understanding he had of God. And I guess the only thing that I thought about that he could have held on to was that his ancestor Abraham had things going on in his life that didn't necessarily know how it was going to piece together.
Right.
So maybe Joseph was saying, that's my example.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I want to lean to. Because we look at Joseph and we have that story.
Right.
And we have Daniel.
Yep.
And we have the other stories. Joseph
But,
didn't have a whole lot.
yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, because when Joseph's going through this, he can't flip ahead. Go, what happens to me in prison? You know, he's sitting there going, now what? And I'm sure, you know, through part of that, he's thinking when they chuck him down into a cistern, my life's over. This is how it ends. You know, close the book. But yeah, you know, he had to have enough faith, and maybe it's the fact that he, being the favorite, had a little more time with Jacob and heard the stories a little bit more and learned more about the God of Abraham and Isaac, and heard the stories of Jacob at Bethel and places like that, and realized the importance of having that faith in God. But he, you know, he internalized it. And that's one of the things that, just like with us, every person can hear the same gospel message and it impacts them differently. Because I'm just going to go out on a limb here again and say, if his brothers had heard a little bit more about Abraham and Isaac and even the experience their father had, they may not have been so quick to turn to murder. Now again, pre-law, you know, Moses has been coming for a long time. There's no law up there, but murder is kind of one of those universal things. Since Cain and Abel, they knew not a good thing. And yet they kind of turned to that, where Joseph, even in the hardest times, remains faithful to God. He has that faith and he stands on it, and he knows what he should and shouldn't do. So he has that faith. But like I said, you know, we can all sit here in this room, we can all hear the exact same lesson, we can all hear the exact same gospel message preached, and each person's going to take something different out of it. And apparently Joseph internalized that enough to know, this is what I need to lean on. And, you know, I think it's also a tribute because he understands to lean on God, but in those moments, he had nothing else. And I think we can feel that way at times when the world seems to be crashing down around us. We don't have anything else, but we still have God. If we keep our faith in him and we hold on to that, we still have that relationship with him. And that's what we need to hold on to, like I was talking about, and decide, do we focus on the woe is me, or do we say, I still have my faith, I still have my trust, and God will bring me through this, whatever way he chooses, but he will bring me through it. And, you know, you go back to one of my favorite verses, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego sitting in the fiery furnace, and right before they go into the fiery furnace, and they look at Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, you know, who can save you from my hand? Well, our God can. But even if he doesn't, still going to worship him. And that's kind of, again, way different time period. That's way after the law. But there's still that point of Joseph had to have that mentality of, I know God can deliver me from this, but even if he doesn't, I'm going to remain faithful. And that's the hardest thing, because even when we decide to be faithful, if you're anything like me, I want to be faithful now. And so, God, if you could stay on my schedule, kind of keep up with me here, that would be really good, because I got my faith here and I want an answer. But God might say, wait. And again, the story we see of Joseph develops over years, not months. And it develops over a long period of time in a lot of situations. And by the time he finally reunites with his family, he's married and got kids and you know, all this kind of stuff. So there's time that passes, and he remains faithful through all of it. And it really isn't towards the end of the story that he really starts to see God's plan coming out of it, but his faithfulness held true.
Despite him being a spoiled brat.
He held it pretty well.
And he's only 17. He's still a very mature kid.
Yeah. Yeah, he was definitely Dad's favorite. And he wasn't when he got sold to the caravan. I don't think they gave him a coat of any kind of color or ornament or anything else when they slapped the chains around his wrist and said, keep up. Or the camels will drag you.
Well, every time that anybody is faced with life happening to them, you can make choices to either
Yep.
deepen your faith or get really bitter, and it sounds like he took the right turn there.
Mm-hmm. And you're exactly right. We make that choice all the time in our life. Are we going to let the things of this world push down on us and embitter us? Or are we going to keep moving forward in our faith and see what God's going to do through that? And we have to decide. Because if we internalize anger and hatred, it's really hard for God to move through that sometimes. It's hard to look at him when we're all worried about us. But
So how many brothers actually sold Joseph? Because Reuben actually wasn't there.
Reuben wasn't there. He got out of it. Benjamin's not there because apparently he's born because it talks about the 11 stars bowing down. But he would have been way too young to go out into the field at this point. So, 10 at most, 9 probably. So, and it's funny because Judah's the one who goes, hey, let's sell him. And that's where we get the line of Christ through. See, the whole lineage of Jesus is full of interesting characters. And Judah is a great example of that. There's some other things Judah did that weren't too great either. But that's kind of the funny thing that you look at that and it's like, oh, look, it's the ancestor of Jesus. I know, let's sell him. Wow, really? So, God works through colorful characters, let's say.
It's interesting to me how God used David's upbringing as the favorite child and as the supervisor of his brothers, and used those same qualities in Egypt when he
Absolutely.
Be in charge of everything. But he had to have him molded out of the arrogance of.
And we see it throughout the story. Spoiler alert, we're going to tell you the whole story basically by the time we're done with this discussion. But, every place that he's taken, when he went into Potiphar's household, the household was blessed because of his administrative skills, because of the things that he knew coming out of his home stuff, and because God was blessing him, he was faithful. And then he gets sent to prison, same thing. He rises to a position of authority very quickly, moves on to the next place, rises to a level, because they're talking about when he was in jail that he was basically the jailer. Here, Joseph, lock up and turn off the lights when you go to bed, and he's a prisoner. But they knew that they could trust him because, again, of that faith that he held on to. So, yeah, everything that happens over the next several years is God grooming him for that moment, all the way from, his childhood through his dreams to every position that he holds in Egypt is just bringing him that much closer to what God's ultimate purpose is. But any one of those things, other than, being Dad's favorite, any one of those things, he could have sat back and whined about. Because I don't want to be sold to Potiphar. I'm going to do nothing. Okay, the story ends with him being taken out and beaten to death because he backtalked Potiphar. What? And then when he's falsely accused, he gets thrown in prison. And again, he doesn't let that keep him from continuing to honor God and do the things that he knows he has to do. And he had moments of doubt. He's human. But at the same time, he keeps pressing forward. And everything was just one more piece, a little bit closer, a little more preparation. And then finally, he was able to do what God called him to do, what he had in mind all along. So yeah, that's cool. Spoiled kid makes good.
Then he treats his brother good.
Yeah.
His brother's good in the end.
Yeah. Which, again, shows you his heart. Because if he would have had their same heart, when they came up and bowed down before him, he's like, guess what? I got a bunch of cisterns out back waiting for y'all. Chucked them in one at a time. He had the full power of Pharaoh behind him. He could have done anything he wanted to. but instead shows compassion. So, all right, any other questions? Comments? Sing a song? Jokes?
Yeah, I've got a question, because you mentioned earlier, when, I can't remember who it was, asked about how many brothers were when he sold you. Said Benjamin Paul wasn't even born yet.
If he was young, probably.
That's what because he knew about him when he was in prison over in Egypt, so I
Yeah.
was thinking he had to have been born.
Yeah, he would have been born, but he would have been very young, because it talks about in the dream that the 11 stars, well, the 11th one would be Benjamin, because Joseph was the 11th son, so if they're going to have 11 stars there, one of them had to have been Benjamin. So, and again, stories in Hebrew literature aren't always exactly chronological. So you can have Benjamin referenced even before we have the story of his birth. It works that way. So. Anything else? If not, I'm going to push the button. Shut us off. See y'all at home.